Have you heard about Anchor? It's the easiest way to make a podcast, and it's the way I'm making my podcast right now. And it's free. They have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. And Anchor is going to distribute your podcast to all the major important places you would ever want, like Spotify and Apple and so many more places. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. I love it. It's so simple. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hi, I'm Lindsay, and welcome to the Intuitive Psychologist Podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I've been in the mental health field for over 15 years. During my spiritual awakening, I've realized that psychology is really missing the mark. I believe that traditional therapy combined with spirituality can actually lead to long-term healing and growth. And I've actually had the luxury of seeing this happen within my own private practice, where I've tried to incorporate the two together. My intention for this podcast is to discuss my opinions about spirituality and therapy, and I like to do it in a fun way. My hope is that I'll inspire other people to explore different ways to improve their lives. But I'd also like to normalize what many people have been going through or are currently going through, so that you can know that you're not alone and that you're not crazy. And maybe along the way I can inspire a few therapists along the way to actually think outside the box and to offer their own version of intuitive healing. If this is interesting to you, then join me on this journey as we try to have fun and explore an informal way to bridge the gap between psychology and spirituality. Well, welcome back, my friends. I am on another awesome podcast with another friend of mine, Kat Guthrie. I'm going to have her pop on here momentarily and introduce herself officially, but we are looking forward to having a very fun conversation about mental health, spirituality, and Akashic Record. So, Kat, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Lindsay. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really honored to be here. I love you to pieces, and I'm so excited to talk about the Akashic Records today. And I'm just delighted. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. So Kat and I met each other, June? Was it May or June?
I think June. Just June, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. It feels like we've known each other for a lifetime, and apparently we have known each other for multiple lifetimes.
We have indeed.
Quite complicated at times, but...
It's true. I mean, what lives aren't complicated, right?
I totally agree. But so Kat is part of this group that we are involved in, that are spiritual beings kind of coming back together in this lifetime in hopes to try to affect positive change. And Kat's specialty in this lifetime is Akashic Records. So do you want to describe to my listeners what that means?
Absolutely. So the Akashic Records are a term for what you would other refer to as past lives. So it's the idea that as souls, we are eternal beings. And so we reincarnate on Earth and probably many other places again and again and again as a way to learn and grow. This is all part of the soul's growth. And so the Akashic Records are you can think of it like a library or a database of all of the past lives that you have ever lived. The term Akashic Records comes from the Akasha is a Sanskrit word meaning the ether. And so there was a woman, Helena Blavatsky, who was part of the founding of the movement of Theosophy, who adapted many Sanskrit writings as part of her work, her channeling work, and otherwise founding Theosophy. And so she and many of her colleagues glommed onto this idea of the Akasha, and one of them created the concept of Akashic Records. So that's what they actually are. And what I've been taught and what seems to be true in my experience is that the Akashic records are stored in our eighth chakras. So everybody has them, everybody has access to them. There are some people out there who will say that the records are stored in some big library out in the middle of who knows where, and that is potentially true. But what I have found is that we all have access to our own records. They are all stored within our own energetic system. And there is no one and nothing that can tell you that you do not have access to them because they are yours. They are who you are.
And how do you find people finding out about their past lives and tapping into this? How do you find that to be helpful for them?
Well, I originally got into the Akashic Records because I was going through a series of major health challenges. And I knew that, I had gone down the path of traditional medicine and nobody had any answers for me. I had gone down the path of herbal medicine and it helped a little bit, but it really didn't, it wasn't everything. And then I went into spiritual and energetic healing, and that gave me more of the answers. But still, the more time I have spent healing, the deeper and deeper down my path I got, and still there were problems that I couldn't explain. In particular, for me, one of my basic issues is that I tend to not feel safe in the world. And yet there was nothing in my history in this life that I could really map to not feeling like I had a right to be safe. And that's when I really started to delve into past lives, and kind of figure out how all of that was possible. So, that's one of the ways that you can get into it, in terms of just not being able to explain something that is happening in your life. But more than anything, we have access to these records all the time, like I said. And what that means is that you are always pulling down information from your records as a part of this life. You look at some people who are more wise than others, right? Some people who are able to make better decisions than others. And sometimes that is because of the way that they're raised. And sometimes that is because of the inherent wisdom that their soul has earned over lifetimes. So, to be able to tap into your soul's wisdom is such a powerful thing to understand. To understand this life and this world from a different, higher perspective, and understand that you have done this countless times. And if there's like a negative pattern in your life that you cannot get yourself out of, if you continue to be in abusive relationships, or you have continued to struggle with your mother about the same pattern for the last 40 years of your life, all of these things have links to your past lives, because the pattern wouldn't exist if there wasn't some part of you that needed that pattern to be played out and healed. So it's just like, I tend to think of past lives as like, this is therapy that just goes even deeper than the way we think of therapy traditionally.
And even longer too, lifetimes, instead of just like, I don't know, a few months, or in psychoanalytic terms, several years or decades, but lifetimes. God.
Yeah, it can be really overwhelming sometimes. But some of the benefits too are like the fact that just the idea that like there's so much more juice available to you, if you will, where it's not just like you've been in this pattern with your mother for 40 years. It's like you have incarnated with your mother in a different life when you were her mother, and the energy pattern was created then, and that energy pattern existed in that life because 3 lifetimes previous, you had another relationship with your parent that was a similar pattern. And so at first that can feel kind of overwhelming, because, these patterns can continue on. Potentially, if you haven't healed them, they can continue on back towards the very beginning. But it is also so empowering, I really find, because it's like a big ball of yarn, and you're just unraveling the ball one roll at a time. And the deeper and deeper and deeper you get, you really get to figure out like, wow, this has been with me for such a long time. And here I am at the precipice, ready to let it go.
That's beautiful. Ready to let it go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so empowering just to realize how much healing is available to us if we're really willing to go deep, you know?
Yeah, I have lots of clients that come to me that are like, I have, like you said, a ball of yarn, or like,
Mm.
I sometimes visualize it as Christmas lights, and when you pull
Yes.
them out every time, you're like, fuck this again. And then I'm struggling, with my capability as a therapist to try to help pull it apart. The client is struggling to help pull it apart to make logical sense, and sometimes there just isn't any. So it sounds like when my clients are struggling, or when I'm struggling to take it to the next level, this could be the next good step for them to be like, oh, maybe it's a past life thing that, we need our cosmic therapist Kat to come in and untangle this a little bit further than what Lindsay could do.
Absolutely. I think that that is 100% accurate and so powerful, right? Because like one of the benefits about going into your records is that there are, there are some techniques out there for accessing past life information. Like the one that I'm thinking of right now is QHHT, and I don't remember what that actually stands for. But it is regression therapy. So it takes you
Mm.
back into, the memory and has you relive it. And that is a totally, as far as I can tell, a totally valid way to relive your past lives. But what it does is has you actually relive the trauma. And so if you don't have an amazing therapist like you who can support you in unwinding the trauma of reliving something that challenging, then you can be left kind of really really strung out by it, or re-traumatized really.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with the records, it can be less of an intense experience. It can be more intense if you want it to be. But oftentimes, the way that our spiritual guides deliver the information to us is in a way that is the most kind, the most loving, and the most generous way of sharing information, which is in terms of it being more like a book. They don't tell you, you don't relive the memory. What you do is somebody tells you, well, in this life you were a princess, or, in this life you were a peasant, or whatever the case may be. And that is a way for you to take in the information and not be traumatized by it. You died in this past life because you were murdered by your mother, right? You don't want to relive that trauma, but
Mm-mm.
to know that that happened and that is some karma that you are trying to unwind, that is a very powerful gift.
And can you describe to me what your interpretation of karma is as it relates to your work with the records?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I think of of karma, people are always like, oh, karma's a bitch, blah, 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 blah. But like more than anything, karma, I think, is just a sense of balance. So all it is you can create positive karma, you can create negative karma, you can even create neutral karma, right? Karma is just an energy, and it is the energetic result of making a choice. That's really all. And so when you think about the karma that you bring into this particular life, it is just a record of energy that has been created by your choices, by your thoughts, by your emotions over many lives. And so much of what the New Age movement is saying now is that the karmic system is done. That it was collapsed, I think, in 2012, and my
Mm-hmm.
my guides have confirmed for me that that is the case.
Oh,
So
nice.
yeah, I mean, if they can be trusted, then yes, absolutely, that is that is what has happened. But it doesn't mean that karma goes away. I think what it means is that we stop accruing it in the same kind of sense. So it's not this like very Old Testament, God will smite you if you are a sinner kind of thing. It's not that direct kind of an eye for an eye issue. It's simply like we all have a lot of karma that needs to be cleaned up right now in this moment, which is why things like psychology are becoming so much more popular, why things like the Akashic Records are becoming more of a thing, because there is a lot of cleanup work that we all are being called to do as individuals who are moving into this new higher energy, higher vibe world, you know?
And when you say that, do you mean like trauma work, shadow work, that kind of thing? Or are you
Yes.
referring to, okay.
All of that, anything at all that involves healing on any level. And so, like you can unwind karma going into your Akashic records. You can unwind karma by going to therapy. It is all just accessing patterns in yourself and learning how to break the patterns and create something new.
Oh, wow. That is empowering.
Yeah, I like to think of it as empowering too. It's like probably the best thing I ever did for myself was start going down a healing journey and using all of the different types of modalities that were available to me at that time to learn about myself. And I've tried so many different modalities, and every single one of them had something valuable to teach me. None of them were the solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is no one solution to anything. It is simply what works for you at the time, and what heals you in the way that you need to be healed in the moment.
Yeah, I agree. Even like if you think about therapy, like there isn't just one therapist that will be there potentially from start to finish of your journey, right? Like
Exactly.
I know that when it comes to like traditional therapy, I'm probably really good for a specific client at a specific time.
Mm-hmm.
Once they've sort of graduated from that, then they need to go to a different kind of therapist, or maybe even if like now that I'm doing the coaching, that I'm looking to work with clients that are early in their spiritual awakening. But as I develop, I may actually develop a different type of clientele that will be attracted to me. So I can see how that would be important too, like different modalities over different problems over different parts of your lifetime.
Yes, 100%. I love that so, so very much because, I think we're so lucky to be living in a time where there are hundreds of modalities, thousands of modalities out there to heal all of the disparate parts of ourselves. And I think it's really important to engage with a lot of them, right? Because the reason why so many modalities exist is that there are so many different people out there and we all have so many different experiences. And so not every modality is going to work for every person, but a lot of modalities are going to be the thing that helps you. And it's never just one thing, like I tend to think of myself now as not just like a person, but as like a universe, because inside my body, from a physical level, there's me, there are all of my mitochondria, there are all of my cells. They all have their own thing that they're doing in my life, right? There's also, energetically speaking, there is my ego, there is my brain, there is my soul, there is my inner child. Like there are so many different parts of me inside me from a spiritual, energetic perspective, emotional perspective. And so if you're managing all of these things at the same time, all of them have their own needs, wants, desires, and trauma. And so using as many modalities as you can to heal all of those different parts of you just kind of makes sense.
Exactly, because we're so complex beings. It's like, why would we not, use complex ways to heal ourselves in multiple
Right.
different types of ways? I mean, I see a shaman, I have had therapists, throughout my entire life, energy healers. Now I've got my own records keeper guru. I have all these different things, and then just people come and go in my life that I think are helpful, and they aren't necessarily professionals. They're just really connected to me, and they've been very helpful along my journey. So why would we not tap into everything that we have available to us?
Absolutely. I love that so much. And I'm with you. Like I've also had, a million and one therapists and a million and one different healers, and they all have something valuable to offer. Human beings are so beautiful and complex. And why would you not want to learn from every single person that is available to you to learn from, because we all have something good to share.
Yeah, we do. Different perspective. And as long as it helps you to like move forward or think differently or to embrace something in a deeper way, then why wouldn't we? And most things, at least what I've noticed, very few things kind of counteract each other. There are, I think, some specific like mental health disorders where you would maybe say, hey, maybe there should only be a few people putting their hands on somebody because it's so complicated of a case. But for the most part, when it comes to the wounded walking folks, most of us could probably do with several different healing modalities.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think too, when you think about mental illness, I've had some of my own mental illness, but more than that, I've been surrounded by many, many, many men, especially with mental illness in my life. And there is such a deep spiritual and emotional aspect to mental illness that we are not really looking at yet. We're not really facing. And there is such an opportunity there, because even the description of it being mental illness, right? Like most of the time, the mental part of you is certainly a part of that, but it is an emotional part of you that creates mental illness. Oftentimes it can be, something that comes from your ego. It can be something that comes from your spirit. Mental illness has so many different extensions or parts of it. So I think it is a very delicate, probably one of the most intense types of things that needs to be healed. And so it can benefit from a variety of modalities, but you do have to be very careful because of the nature of the intensity of the illness.
To what extent are you comfortable sharing your either personal or relational history with mental illness?
I'm an open book.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I struggled with depression for a variety of different points in my life. And the way that I always think about that is that for me, depression wasn't a chemical thing. For me, it was that a lot of really awful stuff had happened in my life. And so when I was depressed about something, it was because I wasn't really dealing with the emotions of a particular thing. Yeah, I was repressing it. I was trying to lock it down and just, muscle my way through life. And depression is the natural occurrence of emotions that aren't being managed well, that are just like stuck in your body. The type of therapy that really changed my life is called core energetics. And it's something that I started to do when I first moved to New York. And it was so transformative for me because it is a somatic therapy, meaning that you do a good amount of talk therapy, and then when your emotions get to a certain point, you physicalize the energy inside of you, and the physicalization allows the energy, the stuck emotion, the stuck trauma in your body to leave. And so the amount of healing that I found doing through that changed my entire life. But other people in my life have struggled with mental illness and didn't have access to that same kind of thing. The reason why I moved to New York was because my husband had committed suicide after being diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which is a combination of schizophrenia and some kind of depressive disorder, which we hadn't been able to diagnose up to that point. And he committed suicide when he was in one of his schizophrenic episodes. So, and yet had he had access to the kind of therapy, to the kind of spiritual healing that I've had access to in the last several years, I think he would have had a much different outcome for sure. Because as we said, human beings are so complex. It's not as if I certainly don't believe that the schizophrenia was triggered and then he was a goner, right? Like,
right.
I don't think it works like that. I think he had a lot of things that all built up over a long time that led him to this point.
It's a kind of controversial topic, and I'm just curious, given your spiritual nature and your experience with your husband, do you have any theories on what is like a spiritual meaning behind schizophrenia?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think there's a really interesting fine line with the concept of hearing voices, right? Because I hear a lot of voices. They are all part of my spiritual team. That I am, of all of my psychic senses, my strongest one is clairaudience, and that means that I hear and then can hear the information and share it with people. Or that means I also am able to channel, meaning that somebody, a being, can just speak through me. And I needed to have clairaudience for that gift to turn on. So when I think about the voices that are in my head, I don't always understand the difference between a quote unquote bad voice and a quote unquote good voice until I have spent a little time talking to that voice and figuring out like what their intentions are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a huge process for me of my spiritual awakening has been being able to discern between which are the good voices and which are the bad voices. And so, in something like my husband's schizophrenia, he was dealing with a lot of bad voices. And when I think of the term bad voices, the way that I was taught this by a healer that I worked with is he called them predatory energies. And that's the term that I use, but you can think of them in a lot of different ways. They are energies that are in your field that don't have your greatest and highest good as one of their main priorities. They're there for their own reasons. They could be on their own spiritual journey and they need to get something out of you. And so that's the point of the advice that they're giving you. Or they could be, this word is maybe challenging, but they could be like legitimately evil energies, right? Or just up to no good, negative, causing chaos, whatever. And those energies have a different set of priorities as well. So over time, as I've come more and more into my spiritual gifts, I've learned how important it is for me to have a clear energy field. And that means asking my guides to remove any predatory energies in my field. That means hearing a voice and like realizing over time, actually, I don't like that voice. That voice is not okay to me. It does not say nice things, and I deserve to have the voices in my head be nice. Um, so I think a lot of that for me was like an issue of self-worth. And when I think about my husband, he was such a wonderful man in so many ways, and he rescued me from myself a lot. And he showed me what it was to really feel love. He showed me what it was to have a family. Um, and he also struggled with his own demons. He really did. I also was told by this healer that I worked with that part of why my husband's schizophrenia was triggered was because he was abducted by aliens. And I know that that is probably going to be a stretch for many of your listeners. And I totally understand any hesitation that anybody would feel about hearing that. But what I was told is that there are races out there that, as we have heard, do experiments in human beings, and sometimes they don't put them back quite the way they found them. So all of that is to say, there are a lot of reasons, I think, why somebody can become schizophrenic, and everybody is unique. And
Mm-hmm.
you really have to follow the trail down as far as you can to see what a particular person is really going through to see why that would happen.
Yeah, and for the mental health field, they know so little. This is the one mental illness that they probably know the least amount. I would say, like, I don't know, maybe we understand 5 to 10%. The biggest thing that we know is medication is about all that will help them.
Right.
And having worked with people with schizophrenia, it is no way to live. It is no way to exist. And I've seen both people medicated and stable get off their meds, destabilize, and some even take their life after getting off of medication. And then I've also seeing people that just are medication resistant or take medication and are zombies. And it's really sad.
Yeah.
It's a really sad thing to witness, and feeling hopeless and helpless as a clinician. What we're told is really to work with somebody with schizophrenia. All you do is make sure that they're taking their meds, they know how to shower, they know how to get their basic needs met, they have access to resources and what they need either in the community or whatever treatment facility that they're at. But again, to me, it's like that's no way to live, and there has to be some deeper meaning. And I agree on so many levels as to what you've said about this mental illness. And I also feel like and this, I just want to warn my listeners that this is me taking my therapist hat off and only speaking as a human, playing around with some concepts that I have no right to probably be talking about, but this is a spiritual lens. But part of the things that I'm playing around with in my head as it relates to people with schizophrenia is maybe some souls have chosen to come down into this lifetime with the experience of having schizophrenia, maybe as a compassionate soul to teach the people that are in their lives that to learn compassion and patience and all these other beautiful things. So it may be a more advanced soul that chooses to come into this incarnation to then give all these humans this beautiful opportunity that would not happen otherwise without a disorder that is so debilitating. That's one theory I'm sort of playing around with. And another theory is that, as you said, many of us in an awakening process or with spiritual gifts on board could sound schizophrenic to an untrained ear. But the biggest difference, I think, between somebody with schizophrenia and somebody who is on a spiritual awakening is grounding, right? So being connected into the earth, because what I see often when I worked with people that were diagnosed with some form of schizophrenia, where their head was completely in the clouds and they were not on this earth anymore. And now, do I think that like no medications and I just teach them some grounding techniques and now all of a sudden schizophrenics are good to go? Absolutely not. But I do think that if there was maybe some early recognition that that people with schizophrenia or early signs of schizophrenia couldn't maybe learn some tools onto how to keep themselves grounded so that they're not either too far into space nor too far into ground where, you know, most of our companions in the United States are firmly on the ground and could maybe use a little esoteric universal headspace. But grounding is so important. An acknowledgement that we all have access to these various, you know, capabilities. And so knowledge and acceptance and reverence. And my final piece before I get off my soapbox momentarily and let you take some space to tell me what your thoughts are. But I know that in other cultures in this world, folks that have schizophrenia are actually the people in the tribes that are actually like seen as almost the most spiritual person there, and they are adored and they are just seen as super holy. And so it's really, as Western society, us that says, oh no, you're the people that need to be thrown to the curb, not cared about and disregarded, versus wow, what a intensely connected person that if we can love you and harness that and appreciate it and treat it with respect, you actually are a gift to our community.
I agree with literally everything you just said. I think all of those
Yay.
I think
and so it is.
So it is. I think that all of those things are true. You know, there are lots of ways to become spiritually awake, right? And in the West, we have become so scared of what it means to be spiritual even, you know. I think that Christianity has really messed with our concept of what it means to be holy. And, the church for the longest time has been a political system. It is not, at its heart, it's not truly a spiritual system. Jesus was an amazing man, but the church does not follow a lot of Jesus's teachings. And, to be able to see somebody who is going through that kind of crisis as someone who is really desperately wanting to open and wanting to be more closely connected to the divine, I think is probably one of the best ways that we can respect that journey and respect that person. In the church, we used to have exorcisms, right? And exorcisms used to be quite dramatic. And these days, it's not necessary for them to be so dramatic. But somebody who's going through a schizophrenic episode, if they have these predatory energies in their field, right? An exorcism is just the removal of predatory energies. So somebody who is experiencing something like schizophrenia can be guided into their own healing if they have access to a kind of spiritual healer who can do a modern day exorcism. And it doesn't have to be scary. It's just a cleaning of the energetic field. I've been thinking so much these days about what it means to be energetically clean, or to have, just like clean. Clean is the way to describe it, of checking to make sure that your system is free of anything that is not you. And the more that Western society decides that the soul is not necessarily a thing, or that the soul is allowed to be corrupted by the needs of the ego or things like that, we lose track of what is the most divine, what is the most essential part of us. The soul is the most essential part of any human being. And when we lose track of that, we lose track of who we are. And I think that that's a lot of times what happens in mental illness, is you lose track of the best part of you. Yet, if you have something like schizophrenia, the best part of you is really trying to come out. It truly is. And you just have to figure out the way to allow yourself access to the information that is waiting for you just on the brink, as long as you have the right tools. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, just finding the right tools,
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest tools that we have is love and acceptance from others, right? Like if there is a person with any sort of mental illness or mental illness symptoms, because we all exhibit symptoms, we may not all be diagnosable, but if anyone that is struggling actually just has somebody in their life, or multiple people, or a society that just says, you're not damaged, you're not broken, you're not fucked up, you're just going through something right now. And even if it is solely chemical based, which I'm with you on most mental illness, save for a few specifically, most of them are based on situational, and then what is our interpretation of the situation as to who we are or what the world is like. And so if we had more kind, compassionate people in our lives to be like, hey, you're okay, we got your back, we're not going to abandon you, we're actually going to talk about how you're feeling, or I'm going to check in and ask, or what have you, or a society that just says, yeah, man, you're going through it. No shit. I would
Yep,
be too.
absolutely. I love that approach. It's compassion for the journey that we're all on. And I think that's really, that's what an excellent therapist at the end of the day really does, is they have an enormity of compassion for what somebody is going through, and then they have the ability to teach them the skills that they need in order to be able to weather the storm and come out on the other side.
And I'm going to go one step further and say the compassion that is necessary for quote unquote good therapy is having gone through it.
Yes, absolutely. Although, you can have compassion for that kind of thing and have gone through it in a past life as well. So
I love how you brought it right back. Nice. Good
Well,
job.
I mean, it goes back to the wisdom of the soul, right? Like without being aware of your past lives, you don't, have to know that you were murdered by your parent in another life, but your soul, on a soul's perspective, you have a memory of that. And so if something like a similar situation happens in the family of a client that you can have a deeper well of compassion for that person because you have experienced it in another way.
So is this a cheat code if I say those that have intense amount of compassions likely have lived a number of pretty fucked up lives to be able to come into this one and have the compassion without having all the experiences necessary for that level of compassion? Or would you not simplify it to that
I'd say that
degree?
that's definitely one large explanation for why people have a ton of compassion. That no question. When I think about like when you look at the soul, right? The soul itself is an expression of love more than anything else. That is what it is. So imagine you have a bright, shiny new soul, and the soul itself is all love, right? But then it incarnates into a human body, and all of a sudden it runs up against the ego and the mind and survival and violence and all of the things that in incarnating onto earth we experience and we suffer through. And the soul itself is love, but the soul doesn't have the experience of understanding how to deal with the emotional turmoil of battling against the the ego, the violence, all of the things happening on planet Earth. And so more than anything, like the wisdom is what keeps that soul in a place of understanding and compassion. It's not that the soul doesn't have love, it's that compassion is, right? It's a different flavor of love because it's not just loving somebody, but it's also being able to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. And yeah, that's what that really is. So, I couldn't probably give you another example of what that is. I think you've probably come up with the most accurate description I can think of. I love that.
So I am only a step parent, and I know I probably should not have put
Uh-huh. Yes,
only
good. I'm
in
glad
there,
you know that.
nor should I use should after that. As a good therapist, I'm like, I should have done myself. And I also used only. But in this lifetime, I have chosen to be a stepmother and not a biological parent. And that was not something that I thought that I would be coming into this situation with. I, up until 8 years ago, thought, no, I'm planning to have my own children. I saw how difficult it is, and I'm like, okay, I'm cool with the step kids, but like there's a big piece of me missing. But it's so weird because when I talk to parents, I feel like there is a knowing that I have not from this life, because I don't, I mean, yes, I do understand now how to step parent, but it's not the same because I came in when they were like tweens. So I don't have a frame of reference prior to like 11, 12, 13-year olds. But I'm not saying I'm great at this at all. So any potential clients in the future or that I've worked with, you may be sitting there going, girl didn't know what the fuck she was talking about when it came to parenting. She sure did think she did. But for some reason, it felt like I at least understood enough that I could take my book learning and their problem and create some sort of real applicable solution that was good for them. And I was like, I don't know why or how, but that could kind of make sense because I'm sure I've been a biological parent several lifetimes. And so I don't know, maybe.
100%. There is literally no doubt in my mind that you have been a parent many, many, many times. And, I mean, we learn so much from being a parent just once, right? It is the lesson of a lifetime. And so imagine having a series of lives where that's the case. So maybe being a step parent is not the same as being a biological parent. In some ways, I would imagine it is harder.
Oh, yeah.
And so you are drawing from a wealth of knowledge about your previous experiences as a parent to be able to create something different. And you probably you it's possible you were a step parent in another life, or you were part of a mixed or blended family in another life. We tend to think like, oh yeah, in Western history, right, it's all just like nuclear families down the line. But it's really not true. I mean, people died all the time. Families had to bond in new and different ways. And you no doubt have experiences all across the spectrum of what it means to be a part of a family more than anything.
Well, it definitely gave me a new perspective on me being a stepchild to my stepdad. And so I often conflated like my feelings about him as what my stepkids must think and feel about me. And while it gave me a potentially good perspective to understand where they may be coming from when I entered this family, I think it also worked because he wasn't my favorite person in the world. And so I just assumed that the kids would feel the same about me, but then I would act as if that was the fact and then remove myself in this current situation. I was like, that probably wasn't smart because they may or may not have felt that way about me, but it definitely, at least in this lifetime, helps me to understand a little bit by having a stepfather for several years of my life and then now being a step parent. And I had more respect for him and his struggles, but then I also could understand a little bit more as to like what I think the kids were going through having this new person enter in. Even if I was cool or not cool, it was like, she's still an intruder.
Well, I do think that you're being pretty hard on yourself, for one thing.
Well, that's just like
I know.
me, so yeah.
But I think too, like when I think about from a karmic perspective, why you had a stepfather who you didn't really like and you really struggled with, and then you became a stepmother later in life. I see that as a pattern that you are trying to heal, where you manifested this situation of having this step parent that you didn't like, and you have suffered from the emotional fallout of what that meant for you to have a parent who really you didn't feel like you liked or could trust or anything like that. And then manifesting for yourself, becoming a stepmother, and having to play out the emotional damage of that situation. I would imagine that you manifested the first situation of the stepfather because there is a past life trauma or pattern that you are trying to unwind of what it means to potentially bring somebody into your family who is not part of the core group. How do you welcome somebody into your family who you don't really trust, right? And so then how in return can you help yourself to be welcomed in a family who might be feeling a similar way? How can you break the pattern of not feeling safe with a new person in your family, and how can you be that safe person for the next family?
Wow. Well, that was beautifully said.
Thanks.
Mic drop.
Boom. It's true.
Well, yeah, when Kat and her guides speak, it's always the truth because, if we could go back to that for a brief moment, I wanted to ask you earlier about how do you manage the records and having a life? Because from what I've experienced with you, and I feel so fortunate to have you not only as a friend, but as like so in tune with your guides and the records, it almost seems like it's always happening for you. Is that true? And if so, or if not, can you describe what it's like on your end?
I mean, one thing I need to say, I really love you. I love you so much. I think
I
you're
love
amazing.
you too.
And two, yes, it is always happening. I think that like the farther down the spiritual path you go, the more you understand that there is so much to heal and there will always be so much to heal, you know? But what is wonderful about being able to go into your past lives, I do sessions for others to help them go into their past lives, but then I also do it for myself, every day if I'm called to it. And so I will check in with my guides. And if something emotionally challenging comes up, I'll say, guides, is this something that I need to open my records about, or is this something that I can heal without? And sometimes it'll be one, and sometimes it'll be the other. But it is simply, I like, my other job, or another job that I have had in life, is as a software engineer, which is totally different from the spiritual pursuits. But I sometimes think of my past lives as a database. So all it is just it's data. And so what I'm doing by entering my records is simply making a deeper connection, or just making a connection to a database of information that I wasn't previously accessing. And so all it does is it takes it expands your Google search more than anything else, instead of just searching through your current life, all of a sudden you're just searching through your current and your past lives, and all of a sudden you're going to get a lot more results. And so yeah, so it is happening all the time, but life is happening all the time. There's no way to escape it. And I would always, always much rather have a situation come up that is really challenging and have the tools to fix it, instead of staying mired in the unhappiness of a situation, staying mired in what could eventually turn into depression or anger. What matters to me is to understand that all of those reactions are valid, and then to do something about them. And that is why it seems like there's always stuff happening in my life, because dramatic things are going to happen to all of us, but what matters is your level of engagement with those challenging things, and how you deal with them, and how you cope, and how you move on.
I have always felt this huge disconnect with you being a software engineer and the spiritual being that I've known you as since June. However, I don't know why today finally, when you were talking about it, it finally clicked, and I'm like, why is this so odd to me, when that is exactly what she does? One is in 3D and one is in 5D, 6D, 7D, or whatever fucking D we're in. Duh.
It's true. Thank you for that reflection. It does sometimes feel like, what am I like? It's the cognitive dissonance of going back and forth between the mental space and the spiritual space. And yet it is the human experience in a nutshell. We are always managing these different parts of ourselves all the time. And for so many people working in this world right now, we are, especially in the West, we are so called to be in the mental space all the time, because that is the thing that earns the most money currently. And yet, to be able to have a spiritual life, you really need to be able to turn the tables and access a different part of yourself. So in a lot of ways, even though it is sometimes very strange to be ricocheting back and forth between one and the other, I also feel like it is, I am building my skill set in how to do that, how to live in multiple places, not necessarily at the same time, but to be able to move from one to the other with fluidity, as a way to help other people who live primarily in that mental space understand that they can go into the spiritual and emotional space with ease, and that it is something that you are not just it's not just helpful to do it, but it is necessary truly to have a full experience of your humanity. You need to be able to delve into all of these parts of yourself it doesn't all have to be at the same moment, doesn't all have to be in the same week. It can be over a lifetime. But it's important to access all of these different parts of yourself and see how you how your soul plays out in all of these different circumstances, in all of these different ways. And like that's why we come to Earth, right? We come here for the most human experience possible. And all of these things are part of what it means to be human. So we have to experience them all.
Yeah, and I think of like the 3D and the 5, 6 or
Mm-hmm.
whatever D kind of just as like layers, right? So it makes sense that you sort of are mastering this way to like go through the layers because they're all here at all times. It's just, do you access it? Do you know how to access it? Do you know how to like kind of have a little bit more control when you want to be in a certain mental space or dimension of reality? And yeah, I'm not surprised that you're able to really get through that now, which with a lot more ease, because we are just, for my listeners to understand, we have playtime, we meet once a week at least, we often are talking, and Kat will be like, hey, I don't know what's going on, and then all of a sudden it'll be like a little silence, and then Kat will be like, oh, here we go, and it's spot on every time, and you're like, girl, how the hell? But you come in and you just lay down the knowledge because you just are really have a deep connection in, and it's really beautiful
Thank
to
you.
watch, and also to get the knowledge from you, because my God.
Thank you. Well, like I said, it's that, I think I've been on my spiritual journey for 7 years or so. And so it has been a long process of trying to figure out, what is real, what are my gifts, what are my skills. And, for some people it comes very easy. And for some of us, it takes longer. And I know that for me, taking the longer path was important because I have had to learn so much about things like energetic cleanliness, for example, of clearing out my field of all of these predatory energies. And I have had many, and I continue to take them on from people that I'm close to because that's part of the human experience. But just understanding that to be a clear channel for spirit is a pursuit that takes work. It takes time,
Mm-hmm.
and but once you really have the tools to access it, you always have the tools. This is another thing that I've been thinking about so much lately, and that my guides have talked about a lot lately, is that understanding the tools that you have in your toolbox are the most important things. So, like 2020, worst year for certainly for our generation ever, and being able to understand that when something challenging happens to you, you don't have to slip into depression. And instead, you can go find a punching bag at a gym and you can
Hell
stay
yeah.
in your emotions and you can punch the hell out of that punching bag, and you will release so much energy and so much pain through that physical process that the next day you're going to feel like $1,000,000, you know? Just being able to have like a list, I think a list, I think, is super helpful, where just
Mm-hmm.
everything that you know how to do that helps you feel better. You can put emotional eating on there if you want to. You can put whatever tools you have in your tool chest available to you at any time, and then you can just like go down that list when something challenging happens and figure out like what would make me feel the best in this current moment from this list. Is that has been the majority of my awakening process, has been about learning tools and understanding the tools that work for me.
I'm gonna guess that you were a therapist in a previous life, because that is almost word for word what I tell my
Really?
clients all the time. I'm like, 100%. I early in my career, I made some mistakes of jumping too quickly into fixing trauma or
Mm.
delving into trauma, and didn't focus on making sure that people had enough tools in their
Mm.
toolkit. And I saw people really go down a really bad space. And sadly, at least one of them was an inmate. And part of the problem of the prison system is you're not guaranteed that when you show up next week, your inmate's going to be there or that
Wow.
you're going to be there. yeah. And so for one of my guys, I he went there, and instead of me having the maturity to say, hold on, let's not go into the trauma that you have with your mom, because you could be transferred out, because I was in an area of the prison where there was
Mm,
flow constantly. It was the jail of the prison. So just like in regular jail, you can do a crime and then a month later be exonerated. You could do a crime, have the DA pick it up. You're there for 2 years. I also could be there, and then because of prison need, they moved me across the prison. So yeah, I just wasn't thinking. And so I did not stop a guy, and in fact encouraged him to, yeah, let's talk about your mom. And then I saw him dive headfirst into back into drug addiction, and then he got paroled, and I have no idea if he's okay. So that was one of those cases where that will always be a reminder that coping skills is number one. Even if a client is mad at me that we're not going to their trauma fast enough, I'm like, that's fine,
right.
we'll get there, but I need to make sure you are good, that you have enough tools that if something gets triggered, that we can help you get out of that, and that you're
Yeah.
not floating alone, right? So thank God for that. I hope he's okay, and that that wasn't permanent damage that I
Indeed.
did to somebody.
Thank you for
But
sharing that story, Lindsay.
um,
I that must have been so challenging for
yeah,
you and for him. And what a powerful learning experience, I think, for both of you. If I think about that from a soul's perspective of we come here to experience more than anything else, so that the soul has an opportunity to learn and to grow. You both learned probably a ton, and if he if he is still here, and if he has not yet grown in wisdom because of it, at some point, either in this life or another one, he will. And that is, I think that's a lot of the point of having all of these challenging experiences, is that you, even if you don't see the lessons of a potential lifetime come to fruition, if somebody dies too soon, if somebody just never manages to get through the boatload of trauma available, they will at some point learn that lesson.
yeah, I just hope I didn't do irreparable damage on that
Well, just,
end.
like, what is
Yeah,
irreparable damage from a wider perspective? Um, if you think about the idea that somebody dies and then they come back and then they have a chance to heal it again. And I know that that can be a difficult perspective to take because it is very wide lens. But it's part of how I have learned to think about my husband, right? Where he, what I've heard is that when people commit suicide, they immediately are filled with so much regret that they want to turn around and come right back in, right? They feel so
mm-hmm,
badly about it. But
yep.
just because his life ended that way doesn't mean that the lessons of this life are gone. It doesn't mean that he won't reincarnate and have to deal with the karma of that life, both of having schizophrenia and of taking his own life. He will have the opportunity to figure it out eventually. Just not this time around.
Whew,
Yeah. I know
yeah,
that's a really tough one, and I
yeah.
apologize to any listeners who are finding that very triggering, because I know it can be really tough to take. But ultimately, I find it empowering because we we do take life so seriously, and yes, life is can be very serious. But part of why I like thinking in this system of reincarnation is it really does take some of the pressure off.
That's true.
Yeah,
That is true.
yeah.
That is so true. Yeah, I think the heaviness is like the thought that like I could have been the reason why he may have either fallen back into drugs to the point where he, could end his life accidentally or go back. I mean, he was highly,
Mm,
highly gang involved. it may not be that he went back into drugs because we talked about his mom. I mean, who knows? He may have been pressured by his gang to do things I don't know. I don't know. But I guess the human in me and maybe the egocentric person in me is like, oh no, it would be my fault if like something really terrible happened. It would be because I was the one that da da da. But the reality is the way that you put that into perspective is helpful to like remind me that yes, we as humans can cause hurt onto others, right? And especially as people seen in a position of authority, even though I do not feel above anyone, I do understand I have letters behind my name that make people think that I know more than they know about themselves. And so that can be scary. And I think too, I've been told that I think my most recent past life, I was a doctor. And they were like, wow, shocker that you were a doctor before this one. And I was like, well, thanks.
I could see that. I could absolutely see that.
I know I could tell. I was like, yeah, of course, boring. I couldn't be like a fighter pilot or something, like a little bit different. And it's like, no, you were a doctor. Shocking.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah, and I was told that two people currently in my life I had treated in a previous life, and that they did not have a favorable outcome, and that I had sort of beat myself up over that. And so maybe returning to this life to manage that. And that could explain a lot why that thought that I could have hurt this inmate, not just, didn't do the best and helped him to his fullest potential, but that I may have hurt him. I maybe hurts or sits even heavier at that thought that's possible, because obviously if I've lived a million trillion lives, I'm going to be hurting people, and that I will have probably done a lot of damage.
Absolutely. I do think that's a really empowered way to look at it, because it is impossible to escape life without hurting somebody. It's part of why we are here, to be the contrast for other people, to display to them the parts of themselves that they are unwilling to see or incapable of dealing with, right? And to hurt another person, in the old system, it would create karma, and the karma would need to be unwound. But it doesn't mean that hurting that person, like what would have happened if you hadn't hurt them? They might never have learned the lesson, and then, or they would have learned the lesson, but in a different way that was probably equally painful. And, one of the things about going into your past lives is, I re-experienced a past life of mine where there was a traumatic cataclysm. And in that past life, my children died. I had 3 children, and they all passed away in the cataclysm, and I survived. And that was horrible. And so I have carried with me for seemingly all of my lives since then the idea that I am a terrible mother. And so it has seemed like in many of the lives I have led since then, I have been a terrible mother. And I was told by a woman that I worked with on past lives many years ago that my husband in this life had been my child in another life, and I had been abusive to him as being a terrible mother in that life. And so part of why things played out the way that they did with us in this life was because of the karma from that one. And so it was a very real experience for me of learning to take responsibility for the things that I had done in that other life, but also I couldn't crumble under the responsibility. I couldn't take the guilt on for that life, right? Because I was a different person then. I had my own history of trauma within that life and from other lifetimes of losing my children in this original cataclysm. And so as much as I wanted to be a good mother to the child in that life who was my husband in this life. Um, as much as I wanted those things, I was doing the best that I could. And my best wasn't very good, but I was still doing the best that I could. And so you learn over time that like there you have to take responsibility for the things that you have done, but you do not have to take on the guilt of it because guilt will stifle your learning to the point where it is impossible to grow. Yet, taking responsibility for the things that you have done means that you can process the information, you can process your feelings, and you can learn and you can grow. And that is how you stop the pattern. That is how you make sure that you are able to have the experience to learn the thing that your soul wants to learn and move on to something more beautiful.
Amen to that. And I think that that extends to this current life too. When you have done things in this life that you are aware of, taking the accountability and making amends is the most important piece, and not being stuck in guilt and shame, because guilt will keep you stuck. Shame will actually probably
Yes,
unwind you even further.
100%. Shame and guilt are some of the most caustic emotions, and they really get in the way of all of our soul's progress. And yet, they are also learning experiences, right? And so you don't want to beat yourself up more for having felt the guilt or the shame that are getting in the way. All you need to do is just take
Yeah.
responsibility for the fact that you felt them and then transform it.
And I wanted to say earlier too about the parent-child relationship, that one of the things that we've learned through knowing each other is that you and I had shared a
Mhm.
parent-child relationship. And even though you have done nothing to me in this lifetime, and I harbor no like negative thoughts about you anyway, you had said to me when we discovered that you had been my mother in a lifetime many, many, many ages ago, and
Yeah.
that you had abandoned me. And you just said to me, Lindsay, I am so sorry. And I just broke down, because that acknowledgement alone, even though I don't have a memory, I don't have a connection to it in this lifetime, it meant so much. And let's just play devil's advocate for any of my 3D people that are like, that are still listening. Let's just say that are still listening and are like, this is a whole bunch of gobbledygook. Let's just pretend for a moment that it is. And if this was a whole bunch of gobbledygook, just the fact that somebody acknowledged to me and said to me, I am sorry for the pain that you have occurred through people abandoning you,
Yeah.
because that's essentially what you said
It's
to me.
so, or sorry, go ahead.
And that was just immense. And that is something I do with some of my clients, is I will say, on behalf of this person who I know is not able to say this to you to your face right now, I am letting you know that I am sorry. I am sorry that you went through this. I am sorry that this has happened to you. And just the apology has sometimes been enough, which is crazy, because a nun is who taught me this to
Wow.
begin with. Okay, one of my first internships in my doctorate level program, she was somehow a therapist and a nun, and she was providing our supervision. And when she wasn't asleep during the supervision, she would throw some nuggets of insight, and just, and I was like,
Sure.
fuck religion and fuck nuns, but she was a nice lady, and I was like, whatever. But yeah, she like one day pulled out this script, because we worked a lot with sex abuse victims and domestic violence and physical abuse of children. And so she had this script that she read to me, and she said, I will read this to people that I know have
Wow.
been sexually abused. And so she reads a script where it's kind of, I think it would be some version of like a prayer mixed with like an apology letter from her on behalf of being that person being victimized. And I didn't need to have what was said memorized. I just remembered this sentiment of many clients I have worked with will never get an apology, not even a semblance of an apology from the people that have hurt them across their lifetime. And sometimes all somebody needs to hear is, I'm sorry. And it melts them because it's acknowledging their pain. It's just acknowledging their pain and saying, I witness your pain and I am sorry that is something
that's
you're
so beautiful.
experiencing.
And it's what you're doing is essentially taking responsibility for the person who could be doing the apologizing, right? And what makes that so powerful is that you probably have experiences in your past lives from when you did something similar. It doesn't have to be the same kind of situation, but what you were able to do in that moment is take responsibility for your own actions in a different lifetime and to say, what I did wasn't okay. And so I am apologizing on behalf of the person who should be doing the apologizing, but also I am apologizing to a stand-in for the person that I hurt in the previous life. And so I think that that's part of where the power really comes from, is that it's an acknowledgement on both sides of how painful it can be to cause harm and to experience harm, and how both of those things are challenging for the soul, and both of those things need to be healed.
So I'm a very visual person. When people talk, even clients, I get
Lucky.
I get images in my head.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh,
That's the
is
one.
it?
That's the one of my gifts that hasn't come in yet very strongly, and I'm so envious.
Well, it's really weird when you're talking to 3D people and you're like, so let me just describe to you what's kind of going on in my head. And all I see right now is like Jello. And they're like, huh? And you're like, yeah, so let me try to describe what the fuck Jello means to me in this context. Your emotions should be
Totally.
I don't know, whatever. Yeah. So I'm sure all the clairs, anyone with their special clairs and their lack of clairs are like, yeah,
Always,
it's always
no
greener
question.
on the other side. But when you were talking just now, I was just thinking, and God, this may seem ego driven, but I could just see so many of the listeners hearing the way that you're describing things and just crying from not only being seen and heard, but also from the acknowledgement and the empowerment of what you're saying, and how much past lives and your interpretation of what's happening in this life is just such a beautiful way to really look at things. And so I got that vision, and maybe it's just me because I want to cry at the beauty or what have you, but I just have a feeling that people are probably really being
grateful
moved
for
by
you
what you're
saying
saying.
that, Lindsay. Thank you. And I think that I am truly honored to have been your mother in another life. I really am. And also, for the people who don't believe that past lives are even a thing, which is a totally legitimate way to look at it, I would ask the question, does it really matter? Yeah, because at the end of the day,
Right.
the healing is the thing that matters. So if if it actually turns out when we cross to the other side that I got that information wrong and that I was not your mother, it was somebody completely different in that life, what matters is that in that moment we were able to have that beautiful exchange and heal something in both of us because of it. So, I think that at the end of the day, something like past lives, like stretching your belief system, the whether it's true or not is the least important part about it. What really matters is the healing and the growth that comes from it. So I'm incredibly honored to know you and to be here with you in this life again, to be with you again, and just to be able to have these experiences together, because that's really at the end of the day what it's all about.
Yeah, 100%. And I want to add, it's
Mm-hmm.
like the placebo, right? We can give somebody a Western pill, right? A medication from Western medicine, and you could still be healed. Well, not healed. I don't believe that medication for mental illness cures. I think
I agree.
puts a Band-Aid over symptoms, but let's just go with it for the cure, right? A lot of times it comes with side effects. However, if you can heal from a sugar pill, which is the placebo effect, you are being cured by seemingly nothing but the belief in that whatever I'm ingesting is what's going to heal me. There aren't side effects for placebo aside from maybe embarrassment that it was the placebo. And that is if you're only told that you had the placebo, which 9 times out of 10, they don't tell you. You just are like, yes, I'm cured. So why the hell not would you drink the Kool-Aid if the Kool-Aid that we're offering is of no harm, nobody's going to die from it, you're going to be okay. And in fact, all I've seen are the people that really step into their spirituality are growing and enjoying life way, oh my God, horrible grammar. Oh, their life is so much, oh my God, I'm tripping. So this must mean that we are almost at the end because my mental verbiage is like out the window now. So, but yes, they have very full lives, and it doesn't mean that pain and sorrow go away, but it just does mean that you've got a lot more tools in your tool belt to manage it and to work through 100%. It faster.
I agree with everything you just said. I just agree with everything you say because I think you're brilliant. So
whatever.
This has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm so grateful that I got to be able to speak about these topics with you today. And I'm grateful to everybody who's continued to listen because I know that this can be really challenging. And I want to honor everybody who has continued to listen, has stuck with us through this conversation, and is open to hearing what we have to share, because I think our perspective is important, even if it's not for everybody. I really appreciate that people want to listen.
Me too. So I want to start something new with all of my guests, and so you will be my first one that I actually remembered to do this with. So bear with me. But if you could give somebody newly in a spiritual awakening one piece of advice or a tip or a trick or anything, what would you give somebody, or what would you say to them in this moment?
I think the thing that I would say to somebody in going through a spiritual awakening is, more than anything, trust yourself. Because at the end of the day, that is what it comes down to, is trusting yourself, no one else. No one can tell you who you are. No one can tell you what your gifts are. No one can tell you anything that you don't on some level already know. And so that's why I talk about tools, because you have all of the knowledge in you, no matter what. All you have to figure out is how to access it. But everything that you need, you have. So trust yourself.
Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to drop the second mic for the night and call it a day. Now, Kat, how can people find you and work with you? And I will definitely be sure to add this to the show notes, but just for those that are listening and maybe grabbing their phone right now or laptop and going to Google you.
Totally.
Or find you,
the best way to contact me is through my website. It is katguthrie.com.
Simple. Okay. And any other social media plug?
I'm not using social media very much right now. You can find me on Instagram as Keeper of the Scripts, all _, but I haven't done very much on there yet. So the majority of the information you'll find about me is on my website, but I appreciate you plugging it for me, because I know I'm trying to get better at it.
Yeah, I will be pressuring you, just like you are helping me with my all of my spiritual gifts and also my technical gifts with internet and all that fun stuff. I will be pressuring you to be out there, because you have a lot of really good things to share with people, and I'm sure after they've heard you on our podcast, just chatting today, that they're already intrigued. So please check her out, and the information will be in the show notes. And I will say goodbye and thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful. Take care, everybody.
I just wanted to say thank you all so much for your love, support, and continuing to listen to my podcast. If you feel called, I would really appreciate you to subscribe to my podcast and rate it and write a review. When you do that, it helps to put my podcast so that more people can get access to it and know about the podcast. Feel free to share it with anyone that you think might benefit from some of these conversations that we're having. And please be sure to follow me. Primarily, I'm on Instagram at the_intuitive_psychologist_111. I know it's a mouthful. I had to set myself apart from all the other people that kind of had similar names, so I apologize for that. On my Instagram, I not only talk about a lot of the things that I talk about on the podcast, gives you some tips and advice for mental health issues. Every Wednesday, I'm doing a live meditation. The specific time will be to determined, but probably either late afternoon or early evening, Wednesdays Pacific time. And I'm also occasionally on TikTok at Intuitive Psych. You can also email me at intuitive.psych.111@gmail.com. Feel free to email me with any questions, comments, any stories that you'd like to share. And hopefully in the very near future, I will be able to start providing spiritual services because I'm going to manifest that. So if you want to get on the list so that once I get my life sorted on that and get the logistics sorted out so that I can provide spiritual services across state lines, please email me there. If you're in the state of California and you would like to have some work within the spiritual psychology realm, please email the Gmail account and let me know that you heard about me through the podcast, and I will be happy to give you a discounted rate if you mention that you heard me on the podcast. And I'd love to work with you guys. All right. Take care, and I love you all. Stay safe, and remember, you are the light.